Hello and welcome to Business 7. Thank you for joining us. In this edition, we're going to get some expert insight on the fuel price in Namibia, that is both the diesel and the petrol price. We're also going to bring you news from South Africa, Benin and Ghana. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the economic forecasts for sub-Saharan Africa. But first, let's take a look at the stories in the printed edition of today's Business 7, which you of course can find in Republikein, Namibian Sun and Algemene Zeitung, or you can read the stories on the websites of the newspapers. On our front page today, we're taking a look at what impact the budget allocation or the increased budget allocation will have on vehicle sales in Namibia. Now, Finance Minister Shimi, during his midterm budget review last week, indicated that government plans to spend about 194.8 million on vehicle purchases in the fiscal years to 25-26, and this is expected to boost business at car dealerships whose sales tanks have been running on reserve since the recession and the pandemic. On page 3 of Business 7, we're taking a look at the restart plans of the Lange Heinrich uranium mine that, of course, belongs mostly to Paladin Energy, and according to Paladin's latest sustainability report, the Lange Heinrich mine will at full capacity produce enough uranium annually to supply more than 1,000 megawatts electric nuclear power plants for a year. Also in Biz 7 today is the price monster, which craves grain and maize. Now, inflation in Namibia has been taking bread out of the consumer's mouth over the past year, with the staple inflation drastically increasing from 7.5% in September 2021 to 13% in September this year. Our infographic, which is on page 4 of Business 7, is a snapshot of the mid-year budget review, which was tabled, of course, last week by Finance Minister Shimi.
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
Namibians have to absorb a massive hike in the diesel price of $1.98 per litre this week. To talk about the impact this will have on the economy, as well as why the diesel price in particular is so high, we spoke to the economist at Simonis Storm, Theo Klein. Today in Namibia, the diesel price is taking a massive hike. Before we talk about anything else, let's talk about the implications of a diesel price hike the size of this.
So with diesel having a widespread use in the economy, generally from farmers who use generators on their farms for various activities, manufacturers who use diesel in various production processes and so forth, I think it will certainly be inflationary, definitely increasing the costs of various businesses in the economy. And given the current environment, I think it's likely to be passed on to the consumer, with businesses also having very limited space to absorb most of the cost on behalf of the consumer. So I think, it's also businesses struggling to still recover from pandemic lows. I see very little scope for businesses to absorb these costs. So I think they will be passed on to the consumer. And so we can see increase in prices in various sectors. As I said, diesel has a widespread use. So it can be that consumers see a slight increase in food prices to even just logistic services prices from truck companies and so forth. So I think that could probably keep inflation fairly elevated. We certainly did sort of expect inflation to have peaked in August of this year in Namibia. We do see early indications that overall inflation rates are coming in lower. But I think at least going forward, although inflation will be coming in lower, it will still be quite high. So inflation is likely still to be in the range of anything between 5 and 6.5%, more or less, in the next couple of months. And I think this diesel price increase will certainly keep inflation elevated or sticky at those high levels.
Yeah, it seems like the buck, which the consumer does not have, invariably always stops at the consumer.
Yes.
Theo, before we move on to the petrol price, what is driving the diesel, specifically the diesel price internationally?
Yeah. So, look, I think after the lockdowns were put in place across the globe in 2020, oil producers did cut back on production because obviously there was less demand for oil. People were staying at home, working remotely from home, so less demand for oil. And I think supply has not managed to keep up with the increase in demand. As economies recovered significantly in 2021, we're still seeing very high growth rates coming out of various economies in the first half of 2022. So I think demand has significantly increased. Globally, we also know since about June or July that the consumer has shifted his or her spending away from merchandise goods, away from online shopping, more towards services. And within services, you then also have transport, because tourism is also part of that in services. So I think supply has not kept up with the increase in demand. We also do know that OPEC members are still undershooting their production targets for various reasons. You have underinvestment in Nigeria, Angola, and Kazakhstan. You earlier in the year had political issues in Libya and Algeria and labor strikes at their oil rigs. Then you also have political sanctions on Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. So all these factors are leading to lower oil production. And I think that is also weighing more heavily on diesel. The reason for that is in America, for example, 1 barrel of Brent crude is about 42 gallons. Then you can produce about 19 gallons of petrol, but only 11 gallons of diesel. So per barrel, you can physically produce less diesel than petrol. So, I think economically you then boost the petrol because you get more out of it per barrel of Brent crude. Then I think the other big thing that also leads to lower supply of diesel. And then the other crucial thing I think is that a few standards in various countries say that you need to reduce the amount of sulfur in diesel because it pollutes the environment, it's bad for health of humans and so forth. And now diesel is more costly to produce as you need to decrease the amount of sulfur in your diesel products. So I think all of this is adding to shortages in diesel supply. And then also because you do not see sufficient investment, the refining and production capacity of various countries to produce diesel has also not kept up with the increase in demand and population growth. But this is not a new problem. It has been a problem for the last couple of years, where we do see that global demand for oil is exceeding supply. But then because of the things I've explained now for diesel, I think it's weighing extra heavy on diesel shortages. And that's why we see diesel prices coming in higher. So I think going forward, Namibians, especially those who have bakkies and who like to go camping, should definitely be expecting diesel prices on an upward trend, because these issues are not likely to be resolved in anytime soon.
Consumers were spared a petrol price increase this month, but it still remains expensive. What will it take for the petrol price to decrease? Theo Klein, economist at Simonis Storm, explains.
Moving over to the petrol price, Theo, it remained unchanged in Namibia for this month, which is good news, but it's still considerably higher than it was a year ago or even at the beginning of this year. What will it take for the petrol price to significantly drop?
So I think, Germany, two things need to happen. You need a stronger rand US dollar exchange rate, and you do need lower global oil prices. So what we've seen in the data long term is that the rand typically strengthens in the first and fourth quarter of each year, and typically weakens in the second and third quarter of each year. So if that long-term trend will just sort of, continue repeating itself, hopefully we see a stronger rand towards the end of the year and then first quarter next year. However, I think one thing that's very critical for the rand is, in addition to the local domestic economic challenges such as load shedding and the railways not operating efficiently and politics and so forth, I think the other thing weighing on the rand towards the end of this year is that the Federal Reserve in the US has 2 meetings left where they are expected to increase interest rates. South Africa's Reserve Bank only has 1 meeting left. So if South Africa only hikes by 75 basis points in November, but then the Fed does 75 in November and then also 50 in December, then the rate hikes in the US will outpace the rate hikes in South Africa. And that will be rand weakening, because you then increase the interest rate differentials between these two countries. And foreigners want to have their currency earn higher interest. So they will go where interest rates are rising faster. So that will be rand weakening. So that's why some people are now saying that the Reserve Bank is likely to hike by 100 basis points in November instead of 75, to try and keep up with the rate hikes in the US. Be it as it may, I think let's hope we see a stronger rand in the fourth quarter of this year. But the rand, according to my calculations, would have to strengthen to levels close to 1760, 1755 against the US dollar. And this morning we're at 1815 more or less. So the rand will have to strengthen significantly for us to see the rand oil price coming in lower. But of course, if the global oil prices also continue to decrease, as is widely expected, because of recessions that everyone is expecting in advanced economies, I think then if the global oil price can drop to below $90 per barrel, currently at 93, together with rand strengthening closer to 1760 levels, I think that could lead to fuel price cuts for Namibians.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
Like Namibia, South Africa has huge plans for a green energy industry. Reuters filed this report.
South Africa's plan to kickstart its transition from coal to renewable energy will need $46.5 billion, 3 people familiar with the matter have said. And that's more than 5 times the $8.5 billion Western nations have pledged to the project over the next 3 to 5 years. The sources said the investment plan, submitted to donor countries this month, is provisional, and the figures could change ahead of the agreement being signed. Negotiators are racing to complete the deal before the United Nations climate talks next month in Egypt. It is seen as a potential model for other emerging economies to wean themselves off coal with Western support. However, it is not yet clear how the $38 billion hole in the finances could be filled, or how the bill breaks down. One source said that private sector investors could step in, another that it would be a mix of private bilateral and multilateral funders. One said the African Development Bank was expected to make a big commitment. The African Development Bank said it is continuing to work with South Africa to explore concessional financing options. A spokesperson for South Africa's presidency said he could not discuss details of the plan until it is publicly presented. South Africa is the world's 13th biggest carbon emitter, pumping out 452 million metric tons of CO2 in 2020, according to the latest data from the non-profit Global Carbon Atlas. If successful, the transition plan would see Africa's most industrialized nation gradually shut down its polluting and crumbling coal-fired power stations, which have been responsible for repeated power cuts. They would be replaced by solar panels and wind turbines, and at a significantly faster rate than had been planned in partnership with the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and the European Union. South Africa is also seeking to become a hub for so-called green hydrogen and electric vehicle manufacturing, both of which could attract significant private sector investment.
Every day, you make choices that make you legendary. Journey together with us on the path to securing your legacy as a member of the League of Legends. With the Select Platinum Bundle Fee Premium Bank offering, you will access tools that will enable you to thrive. If you earn 850,000 Namibian dollars per annum or more, you can apply for this offering today via bankvinted.com.na for only 447 Namibian dollars per month. Bank Vinted, a member of Capricorn Group.
Ghana's president has sought to reassure citizens as well as markets that the country will be able to curb the unfolding economic crisis. Reuters filed this report.
Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has sought to reassure Ghanaians and the markets that the government can curb the West African country's economic crisis. And that's without leading to a face value reduction in government bonds. He gave an address to the nation on Sunday.
I'm able to report to you, my fellow Ghanaians, that the negotiations to secure a strong IMF program, which will support the implementation of our post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, and additional funding to support the 2023 budget and development program, are at advanced stages and are going well.
Ghana launched talks with the IMF in July as foreign investor dumped its debt and street protests broke out over economic turmoil.
We are in a crisis. I do not exaggerate when I say so. I cannot find an example in history when so many malevolent forces have come together at the same time.
The Ghanaian cedi has plummeted more than 40% this year. That's triggered soaring import costs, hitting consumer inflation, which reached a 21-year high of 37.2% in September. The president said the government aimed to restore macroeconomic stability within the next 3 to 6 years and to cut the debt-to-GDP ratio to 55% by 2028.
You can have one or the other. It's not something that we at RMB like to say. So when faced with the conundrum of net profit or net zero, we say, why not both?
With the right people, it's possible. Commercial success or community success?
We like people who ask that question. Why not both?
Environment or investment? With our diverse talents, why not both?
In this changing business landscape, we find ourselves asking more and more how best to help our clients. Traditional values
or innovative ideas?
And the answer always is, why not both?
Benin is trying to curb unemployment by boosting its cotton industry. Once again, we take a look at a report by Reuters.
On a large factory floor in southwestern Benin, dozens of young people are cutting, stitching and assembling cotton shirts. It's part of a major push by the West African country to develop its textile sector. Benin is Africa's leading cotton producer, but it exports almost all of that raw. Now an initiative is underway to create jobs and revenue by processing the cotton locally with the goal of exporting apparel to consumer markets in Europe, Asia, Africa and the United States. Letendi Beheton is the managing director of the Glodibert industrial zone known as GDIZ. It is an area that aims to process Benin's agricultural and mining products in order to create jobs and improve the country's economy. It started 2 years ago as the result of a partnership between the government and Arise Integrated Industrial Platforms, a Pan-African venture. Beheton says the zone will include textile factories as well as cashew and pharmaceutical processing units. Although the systems are not yet in place to get cotton from field to factory, GDIZ has started training about 1,000 garment workers using imported materials for now. In just over a year, the industrial zone hopes to employ 15,000 people in 3 textile factories. That will have a processing capacity of about 40,000 tons of cotton fibre, which is good news for cotton farmers like Leonard Majedu. He says he is certain he will earn more when the GDIZ begins its activities, adding that he has already benefited from government support to boost his yields.
The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has released its latest economic outlook for sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to play out with a video on the issue, and with that, it's goodbye from me. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
Last year, sub-Saharan Africa saw some welcome signs of recovery from the pandemic. This year, unfortunately, that recovery has stalled. We now expect growth to slow from 4.7% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022. The region, of course, is not alone. Globally, activity is slowing, inflation is rising, and borrowing costs for many countries have increased. For sub-Saharan Africa, public debt and inflation are approaching their highest level in decades, pushing the region's economies even closer to the edge. First and foremost, precedence must be given to protecting lives. For many countries, this means helping the most vulnerable meet the rising cost of food and other essentials. Beyond that, of course, authorities need to strengthen their resilience to future shocks while also setting the stage for sustainable growth. There are now 123 million people at risk of food insecurity, so measures to support the region's most vulnerable are vital. And with scarce resources, these measures need to be targeted efficiently so that resources go to those who need them most. Second, with increased inflation and a still fragile recovery, authorities should adjust monetary policy, raising rates gradually, and cautiously. Third, countries should consolidate public finances to contend with rising levels of public debt and higher borrowing costs. For some countries, debt reprofiling or restructuring is going to be necessary. And fourth, authorities should start setting the stage for transition to a sustainable, greener economy, creating resilience and high-quality growth as climate change accelerates. For this and the region's other development goals, international support will be critical. The upcoming Climate Change Conference in Egypt, or COP27, will be a welcome opportunity for the global community to reaffirm its commitment to effective climate action, adequate finance, and a just transition.